Bone-in prime rib on a pellet grill. Around this neck of the woods, we absolutely love prime rib. And I have cooked a lot of them on different styles of pits. But there is a few tricks that I'll teach you so you get it right. So grab yourself a notepad. We're gonna amplify some backyard barbecue fun. I started off with 10 pounds of prime rib. It's a choice cut. So yeah, it's not a prime rib, but it is a primal ribeye cut. The dude that came up with the new economic plan has got those beef prices through the roof. But I ain't eating the bugs. For this prime rib, I decided to kind of do a rough French style cut. Whenever I do a bone-in prime rib, I do separate those bones a tad from the big chunk of primal cut. But seeing that this was just a 4-bone prime rib, it's pretty easy to French style it too. You can get as fussy as you want when you're cleaning off them bones. I just scraped them down a tad, and what's remaining is pretty much gonna burn off anyways. Unlike a lot of the other blowhard craters out there that say, I'm saving this scrap to make sausage. You never see a sausage video. I need that scrap because this week I'm making some venison snack sticks. When it comes to trussing up this prime rib, it is easier than it looks. And one big tip, it all deals with the knot. Number one, I make sure that I have plenty of length on that string. And I also always cut at least one extra piece. Because it never fails, I always tend to break at least one. Yep, there it goes. Ricer has too much power. One great tip that I actually learned from my good buddy Russ over at Smoky Ribs is to take that string and loop it 1, 2, and 3 times. This way it will hold when you cinch it up tight. Now just plop on a couple granny knots, and when you get it all done, just cut off that excess string. And yes, you should do this because the butcher twine will keep that prime rib in a nice uniform bundle. Whenever I have a big chunk of meat like a prime rib and the time, I prefer to always salt brine it. For some of you, you might not know what a salt brine is, and that's simple. Just take either kosher or sea salt and coat that big chunk of meat good. And don't be afraid to coat it liberally because this chunk of meat can handle it. Then just throw it in the fridge uncovered and let that salt do its magic. And the longer you leave that prime rib in the fridge, the more that salt is gonna penetrate. This will give you a much better flavor in that bite, instead of giving you just a salty, crusty outer edge. This prime was in the fridge for 16 hours, but you can go up to 2 days if you want. A couple hours before you're actually gonna cook this prime rib, I suggest you take it out of the fridge and season it up. You can't just have salt on it, you gotta add some more layers of flavor. To get my seasoning to actually stick to this big chunk of meat, I always use a little bit of olive oil, spread it out nice and evenly on all sides. For this one, I use Prime Time from PS Seasoning. We really enjoy the spice blend in this rub. It is a perfect fit with a prime rib. You got a little bit of buttery flavor along with some garlic and black pepper. If you don't have Prime Time from PS Seasoning, check the links below, but go ahead and use whatever you prefer. The bonus is, the Prime Time has a tad of buttery flavor too. After it's coated up, let that prime rib breathe for about an hour before you get it in some smoke. For all you people that don't have any type of smoker, you can do this in the oven too. You're just not gonna have any smoke flavor. So buy a smoker. Today I'm using my Traeger Timberline, but you can use any pellet grill that you want. So just preheat your pellet grill to 225 degrees. It's always good to cook at a lower temp on a prime rib because you're striving for that wall-to-wall pink. If you cook too hot too fast, you tend to get a lot more grain on the edges. I'm shooting for around a medium rare to medium on this cook. This timberline is heated up, so let's get this prime rib under some smoke. I always put the thickest cut of that prime towards the hottest part of my pit. When it comes to the timberline, it is a little hotter on the right-hand side. If you're planning on making a homemade au jus, put a pan underneath that wire rack and collect it. And then when you're all done cooking it, just scrape that fondant in there and that's gonna give you a great base for some delicious au jus. On this one, one, I'm just doing it Duke style. That means we're doing it without our underpants. You know, I don't have a pan under it. We're doing it Duke style. One important tip that you should pay attention is actually when you're going to probe your prime rib. You want to make sure that you're getting a good reading so you don't overcook this big chunk of meat. I always find the center with my probe, then I back it out a tad because the outer edges are going to be about 5 degrees warmer. And I don't have any shoe leather eaters around here, so I need to make sure that I have as many pieces that are at medium to medium rare as possible. Here's my #1 tip to getting that prime rib even across the whole board. I always rotate my prime rib 90 degrees every 30 minutes. During the cook, if I do see one temperature probe reading a little higher than the other, I might actually rotate it 180 degrees. But if you don't care about different temperature donenesses, just leave it in the same spot. Grandma will have the fire pot side. You might end up. I guess we're not going to say that part because maybe I got a little too cocky. And for all of you beginners, I typically plan about 30 minutes per pound to cook a prime rib. Once I hit an internal temperature of 80 degrees on this prime rib, I took a little foil and wrapped up them bones. You don't have to do that, but I think they just look a little nicer. After I finish that step, I start to make up my simple garlic butter sauce. It's a very easy recipe, but it adds a ton of flavor. For this size of prime rib, I chopped up a couple tablespoons of each of rosemary and thyme. Yeah, it's a little bit of a pain in the butt to pull the leaves off a twig of thyme. Twig of thyme. Sounds like my tongue is glued to my teeth. Even if it's kind of annoying, these two herbs along with that prime are a match made in heaven. To mix this all up, grab a saucepan, 2 sticks of curry butter, a couple heaping tablespoons of some minced garlic, and then your rosemary and thyme. For most of you, I suggest before you start putting on that garlic butter sauce, put a pan underneath your prime rib. Once I've reached an internal temperature of 90 degrees, then I start adding that deliciousness to develop a beautiful and crispy outer crust. But drizzle it on at first because you do not want to disturb any of that seasoning that's starting to set. I'll continue to keep on adding this until it's all gone or I've completed the cook. Just make sure that you don't spill it inside that pit because you might get a grease fire once you start heating it up. Because this prime rib is only about 9 pounds and it's a 4-boner, 4 boners. Because this prime rib only weighs about 9 pounds, once it reaches an internal temperature of 105 degrees, I'm pulling it out of this pit. Then just loosely tent it with some aluminum foil. I want this prime rib to maintain the heat that it's at, but because of carryover, it's actually gonna crawl up about another 10 degrees. Now crank your pellet grill up to the highest setting. This Traeger Timberline goes up to 500 degrees. If I was cooking a full primal cut, then I'd probably pull it out around 108 to 110 degrees. Your carryover temperature will kind of depend on how warm it is where you're resting it. And a tip, just leave your probes in the meat if you're able to on your pellet grill. This just helps so you don't have to try to locate that center again. This Traeger Timberline took about 15 minutes to level off at that 500 degrees. On the searing process of this prime rib, I rotate it every 15 minutes. And I pull it once I reach an internal temperature of about 122 degrees. The time is all going to depend on what style cooker you're using and how hot you're running. If you prefer yours to be a little bit more done, then you're going to add about 5 more degrees. If you're looking for shoe leather, smoke a brisket instead. This next step is pretty important. You're going to repeat that resting process for another 30 minutes. Get it off that wire rack and loosely cover it again with some aluminum foil. I don't know if you can really see from this side of the cutting board, but this thing has been drooling. First thing that we need to do is get these strings cut out. Now one of these, it's a perfect little snack for anybody at midnight. Just start gnawing on it. It's our moment of truth. Slice her right in the middle. Ooh. Oh yeah. Decent medium rare. Maybe a little bit on the medium side. Better lop off a slice. Now the style that I'm doing here is pretty much always gonna guarantee that you get nice pink from wall to wall. God, I'm making a mess on my cutting board. Now, it's not a prime rib video if I don't test the spinalis, so we'll just take this little chunk. And I did make up some au jus with just the store-bought brand, but I threw in some of my rub to give it a little bit more kick. Now, if this was a holiday, I would make my au jus from scratch. But this is just a demonstration video, so we're cheating. Wow, incredible, tender, and juicy. And this prime time, along with my garlic butter sauce, it's the perfect outside crust layer. I gotta have another one. So if you're looking for a simpler recipe, this one's pretty simple. No sane person is ever gonna argue about a piece of prime rib like this. Well, that's all I got. Roll the nation. Prime rib for Thanksgiving, prime rib for Christmas, prime rib for Easter, but don't forget, prime rib goes well on the 4th of July.